Lead off with a discussion on some overall perspectives. And as you can see with Ronnie and I, we've got our boss. And so Chris Pritcher, RKD Group's CEO. Good morning, Chris, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the chance to kick it off and not spend the whole 5 hours with you.
Yeah, well, we'll see how this goes. We'll see if we cut you off. You might end up going.
That's true. Yeah. I do talk a lot.
So, Chris, thanks again for making the time. You caused a little bit of a stir last summer with your letter to the editor in the Nonprofit Times, saying that all of us in the nonprofit space needed to change what we were doing because it wasn't working in some cases. And that led to this Quit Bad Fundraising movement. And so can you take us through how we've gone from this idea of quitting to the compass today?
Yeah. I mean, I think as we said at the time, I think that, the first step in identifying and fixing a problem is admitting that you have a problem. But obviously you can't really stay in that step in perpetuity. And so you have to really start thinking about how you shift your mindset in order to be ready for the solution. And I think that that's where even over the fall, where my mind went is really thinking about that context of the shift, right? And really what drives an effective shift in mindset, both for an individual, for an organization, and for an industry at large. And for me, there's like two concepts behind it that I think are really important. One is this a concept that you need to have a big idea, like an inspiration. You have to know where you're going and have a mindset to where you're going. And those ideas can be sort of across the industry. It can be about your organization in particular. It can be about something you're going to do over the next year. But then the problem with just the big idea is you don't have any steps to get there, right? And so the big idea has to be layered with the idea of everyday changes, with application of that idea, and really with like a stepwise roadmap to say, where are we going? Because the big ideas, I think, can seem overwhelming. And to me, that's been part of the challenge we've had in the nonprofit marketplace, is that we have a big idea like donor-centric fundraising, or cure cancer, or whatever those pieces are. But sometimes those ideas can seem so overwhelming that we don't know where to start. And I see a lot of nonprofit marketers over complexify, like get too complicated in the idea of, my goodness, if I'm going to move to omni-channel marketing, I have to have a journey that has 14 different channels in it. And the reality is, sure, maybe you get there at the end of the day, but right now let's start with two. And let's start with the first steps of the journey. And so that's really where the mindset shifted, Justin, over the last couple of months, from the recognition of a problem to saying, now let's define the direction that we need to go. And then hence the compass. So our now it's about shifting our mindset and about kind of accelerating into the growth, and in some ways like accelerating into the challenge, right? To say this exists. We've lost connection with our donors. We've lost trust from our constituents. They're telling us that with having fewer and fewer of them donating over time. They're telling us that in surveys. And so now it's time to say, let's take it upon our shoulders as leaders in the industry. Let's take it upon everyone individual shoulders to make sure that we're engaging the donors in the way that they need to be met.
Chris, is that you talked about trying to get to this point of the 14 channel, donor journey. Is that the big challenge that you think nonprofits are facing, that they're looking at? It's like seeing that end goal and not knowing.
Yeah, I think so.
To get there.
Yeah, I think so. And your end goal may be different. And I'm not stating that the 14 channel journey should be your end goal. Fundamentally, the end goal is to rebuild and start building trust with your donors, with your constituents, with the people with whom you serve. And so, but I do think that's the main challenge, Ronnie, is to say, where do we go? How do we start? If I'm here right now, what's the next step that I take in the journey? Even if I have the mindset of creating experiences that engage my constituents, engaging in two-way conversations versus talking at them, that sounds great on paper, but what do I actually do? And that's really the idea behind the compass, right? Is to say, we don't have all of the answers, but to provide a couple of waypoints, a couple of beacons in the mist here to make sure that to at least share with the industry our thoughts on the types of areas that we need to focus on and the types of kind of beacons that we need to be chasing.
So within the compass, and again, there's a QR code on the screen so that you can access the compass. And yeah, there you go. Chris has pointed it out so that you can go and download the full report. There are 4 beacons that we're going to unpack today. So there's connect the dots, there's think dimensionally, there's be you, and plan with care. And those may sound kind of ethereal at this point. Throughout the day, you're going to learn more about each of those 4. And so, Chris, as you mentioned, these are designed to be something to navigate towards, right? To be able to put your mind share towards driving to so that you can affect change. I'm curious, how do you put this into action, like for real? So for the nonprofit leader, right, the chief development officer or the director of development, or even, geez, the executive director, how do you put this into practice and it not be simply academic jargon?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So the way I would think about it, Justin, is let's presume you use the 4 beacons here as a tool, right? And thinking about the areas of progress that you want to make with your organization. But again, your particular organization may not have each of those beacons, may not even think one of those beacons makes sense for you. But the whole point is to say, let's understand the areas of movement that we need to make. And I think the first step is doing an honest assessment of where you are today. And even since I did my confession in my letter to the editor, I've had a lot of conversations about the idea of being kind of quote unquote donor centric. And when I talk to many organizations, a lot of times the response is, yeah, we're donor centric already. We got that. And the follow-up question sometimes is, but do you really, right? Like, let's do an honest assessment of where we are and what it means to connect the dots, or what it means to think dimensionally. And again, we'll talk about those details. But I think that first step is to really, truly kind of assess where you are today. And that assessment, historically, Justin, that assessment could focus very specifically on your creative or your sort of strategy planning. But I think now, and that's part of what we're trying to highlight in the compass, is now the engagement with the donors, the constituents, is just so much more complex than it used to be. And frankly, the biggest change is their expectations are more sophisticated, right? All of us as consumers in the marketplace, we've all talked about this, but we all have engagements in the market that set our expectations for how we expect to be dealt with. And I think part of it actually comes from the fact that I remember 10 years ago, one of the big conversations about data and understanding of our donors or customers or whatever you want to be talking about was really around, we have so much data on these human beings. We want to make sure that our communications don't come across as creepy, as knowing too much about them. And I think now, as you think about it as a consumer, I think we've gotten past that to say, we just know that our data privacy is out there. We know that as you walk through an airport, your airline knows where you're standing and can give you directions to your next gate. And so instead of like hearkening on the privacy piece, I think it's really our expectation for experience has really taken a leap forward, right? To say, okay, I know that you know where I am, but so I expect you in the airport to tell me where my gate is and the 3 closest places to eat, right? So I've given up the privacy of my location, but if I'm going to give you that, the sort of data there, if I'm going to be open to it, I expect this really strong experience back. And I think that that's where nonprofits have to realize we're not trying to match the experience of an airline. Well, on plane, maybe that's a pretty low bar, but we're not trying to match the experience of those kinds of apps. But the point is, our constituents have an expectation and we can't be disconnected from that expectation. So to me, it's about doing an assessment of yourself, being honest and saying, where are we today? And the answer is, it's okay if you are single channel, relying on direct mail and sending one segment or one kind of communication to every part of your donor base. That's okay. You don't need to sort of beat yourself up for being in a place that might seem a little less sophisticated. The point is to really understand where you're starting from so you can know where that next step is.
Yeah, and I appreciate the way that you framed that around those liquid expectations. Later today, we're going to spend some time with Stephanie Russell unpacking those liquid expectations. And that's not to say, there is a whole part of the discussion around understanding data privacy understanding the
Absolutely.
ethics of data collection and what data you need to be able to make decisions. So we're not advocating any, unnecessary progression on that front. What we're talking about is no, like let's get to the baseline of what people expect in their experiences and how we're connecting with them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too. You mentioned the data piece, Justin. Like I think historically we've taken the mindset as an industry of like, let's hoard the data, right? Let's just get a big pile of data and we'll figure out how to use it later. And I think now we have to shift that mindset to say, what data helps us improve the experience of the donor, right? And that to me, what helps us to better understand how they want to support our cause, right? And to me, it's really about being strategic about the data that you're gathering, and it's being strategic about the access that you provide to that data to say, I have to fundamentally have the lens of, to your point, legal, privacy, et cetera, but really the fundamental lens of, is this improving my engagement? Is this improving the donor's engagement with my organization? And making it less about us, the information we can gain, but more about the information that if you were a constituent, what would you want the organization to know in order to improve your experience, in order to provide you more opportunity to support a cause that you feel engaged with or that you feel passionate about.
And as we talked about, or as we will talk about, it's about moving beyond like thinking of the donors as transactions, like understanding through the data, what are their interests, what are their value, do their values match up with the organization, and how do I get to better know these donors as people, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Is if we're being honest with ourselves, even our segmentation strategies in most cases are transaction based, right? When was the last time you gave, with how much and with what frequency, right? And that's a fairly standard practice for how we communicate with our donors. And the reality, like you said, Ronnie, is it needs to be moving towards, how do we go from talking at them to at least talking to them about things they're interested in, and in the long run, kind of talking with them, right? Engaging with them in a conversation. But I don't think we need to jump to that, right? The whole point, even if we make progress of understanding the constituent and frankly, understanding why they support the organization or what portion of our organization they care about, and then saying, well, let's at least tailor our engagement with them to what they specifically care about. Because many organizations have so many different services that they provide. There's so many value propositions that they're providing to their community. It's difficult to talk about all the things you do. And the point is, the goal shouldn't be to talk about all the things you do. The goal should be to talk about the things that Ronnie and Justin and Chris care about. And again, I'm not really talking on an individual level. That's a little pie in the sky. But the idea of trying to do it and trying to understand groups of donors and really, frankly, the reason why they engage with your organization versus just seeing them as someone who gave me $75 4 months ago for the second time.
Absolutely love it, man. This is cool stuff. And we're excited for the Compass to be out into the ether. We're going to be talking about it, not just today, but over the months to come. Like we mentioned earlier, there's a QR code on the screen where you can download the report. Chris, we really appreciate you joining us today. We are going to continue the conversation throughout the day. And I know that you've got other things, but that you're going to be tuning in from time to time. So